Hi, I'm Lynn Langett. Welcome to part 2 of using Google's Cloud for developers, getting started with the Google Cloud. Hopefully you've watched part 1. If not, I've got a link here, and this is some information about me. I've been recognized by Google as a developer expert for my education work on their cloud platform. So new year, new cloud. This series is a 6-part series. In this part, we're going to look at using the web consoles, both Google's and some third-party, to spin up some of their services. In subsequent parts, I'm going to be working with some code, and my code samples will be up on GitHub. So we're going to take a look at the web consoles. Again, if you haven't watched part 1, you might want to do that to get a conceptual introduction to the Google Cloud set of services. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to the Google Developers Console, and as I mentioned in part 1, you'll see different layouts of the console because they're transitioning to a more unified one. Pretty much there, but you'll see in the demos. So this new cleaner format is the one that they're working on going forward. So the first thing we're going to look at is this idea of creating a project as a container for billing, account settings, and sets of services. So I'm going to go ahead and go into demo. So there are a couple different ways to get to the console. You can go to cloud.google.com and sign in and then go to my console. Or you can go to developers.google.com where you'll be visiting to get samples and documentation. And if you scroll down to the bottom, you can go to the App Engine console, which I think will redirect you to the new unified console. So I'm just going to go ahead and go here and go to my console. So I've already signed in with my Gmail account, so if I weren't signed in, I'd need to sign in. And then the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to create a project as a container for sets of services. And you'll notice that I've obviously been working with this. I have a number of projects. By default, you can have 10 projects. If you need more, you contact Google. And you can see that you have a project name, an ID, the number of requests and errors, and then the charges over a period of time. And if you have a question about something, you just click on the question mark here. So you can either work with an existing project if you've been doing this for a while, or you can create a new project. Now, Google has a very generous free tier, so it's great to get started. You do, like any cloud service, have to pay attention to what the limits are, so you can refrain from having charges when you're just trying things out. And then they do have account settings, which include whether or not you're at the free tier or your account is enabled for billing. So creating a project is super simple. You just say the project ID and the project name. And then once you have that, then, and I'll just create a new one here. Let's see, I'll call it screencast. Okay, and here I am inside of my new project, and you can see it just assigns it an ID and a number. I could change that ID if I wanted to. And then I have a set of activities that I can do here. Now they do tell me if I'm just a total noob, I can download a sample here, the photo feed sample or the mobile backend starter, which we will do when we go into the section on coding. But just to give you a sense of the services, I'm just going to sort of go down the menus here. So you can see APIs and auth. So this shows you which APIs are available. And as I said in the introduction, there's a whole host of APIs associated with Google services that you may choose to associate with your project, everything from YouTube to different storage accounts. Then you have credentials, and you'll see inside of here you have 2 types of credentials, and we'll be drilling into this as we go forward in this series. You have OAuth and you have public API keys, and you may choose to use OAuth or public API keys to connect applications to your services. So then you have permissions, which is who can work with this. And you'll see we've got some service accounts here, and we can set various permissions. And if we wanted to add a member, we could add additional members here. And then here's where you enable billing. So now if we navigate back to the console, you can see that in the list we have screencast. And if we wanted to work with it again, we would just go over to screencast. So now that we had set up our first project in the Google Cloud console, we want to add some services. And as I said in the first video, the core services that most people will be taking a look at are the virtual machines, which is Google Compute Engine, and the hosted websites and services, which is Google App Engine. So let's start with GCE here and go through the steps, and then I'll take you through the demo. So then we'll set up a new Google Cloud project and enable billing. and then we will create a Google Compute Engine instance or VM using the console, and this will generate a REST request, and we may add other Google Cloud services to our VM, as we talked about in the first screencast. So things like SQL relational storage or other APIs. And then once your VM is spun up, you can connect via SSH and use your VM because, of course, it's fully owned by you. So Google had an offer last year in addition to their free tier that it looks like, as of this recording, which is January 2014, that they have put on hold, but I would encourage you to go here and register for the waiting list. I don't work at Google, so I'm not sure if they're going to restart this, but I would guess that they probably will. It was $2,000 for partners that they picked to try out their Google Cloud platform. So it's a good amount of credit. So try that out. Just thought I'd stick that in here as well. All right, so now let's go back over to the console and let's work with our project. So in our screencast project, we want to add a compute engine instance. So here it tells us that we need to enable billing. So we have to set the country or territory where we're in. I'm the US. And then I have to set the other information. And then I'll have to set the billing amount. Now, because I'm not going to record my credit card for all you guys, I have another project where this has already been set up. So in this Google Compute Engine project, I've already enabled billing. So now to get started here, I just click on Compute Engine, and now I get a new menu that has a number of things over here. But notice I have this red button that says New Instance. So again, this is a nice GUI similar to what you get in Windows, Azure, or Amazon to spin up an instance. Now, the instance creation is a little bit different than some of those other guys, so let's just go through this. So I'll call this Test 1 and Test for Screencast. And here it's showing me the data center location, the size, telling me that the per minute charges are going to start. Here's my zones. As of this recording, I've got US or Europe, which is again different than some of the other guys. Here's my machine sizes. Google recently added, I believe, micro and small for testing, which is great. So let's do a small. And then the boot source. There's been a recent change to their offering here as well. They used to have ephemeral or non-persistent disks, and they made a change based on customer feedback. I think that's integrated here. So new persistent disk. Let's see, existing persistent. I think new persistent disk is what I want here. Yeah, from image. Okay, so these are their images of Linux machines. Now, in addition to this, I made another change that you could create your own image and save it into storage, Google Cloud Storage, and then you could boot from that. And that's what they're showing here, existing persistent disk, I believe, where you would boot that. So I know some of you are going to want to do that as well. And then you can have additional disks as well. If you have, data stored on a disk or something like that, you can just associate it. And this is very much like Amazon with EBS storage and additional disks. So same thing. So then networking, you can have the default network setup, which I haven't created any other ones here, any other networks. Well, I will in a minute. And the external IP can be ephemeral, which is it will change, or you can have a new static IP address. So, and then IP forwarding is disabled. So the next thing is the restart policy, which is automatic, and the migrating VM instances. This is a cool thing about GCE. Part of the offering is that they're hot upgrades. So in other words, you won't have downtime when Google's upgrading if you leave the default settings here. And then project access, here's some of the other services that you can make available in this project. So you can say that you want to have, task queues, for example. Let's just turn these on. You can have BigQuery, Cloud SQL, and then when you're ready to go, you can either just click Create, or if you want to generate a script, this is the REST for this, and you can see this is just a REST command that in subsequent videos I'll show you how to work with this information programmatically, or you have a command line, and this is their command line utility. It's called gcutil. And again, you set this up, it's a Python utility, and then you can script the creation of VMs in this case. So now let's note the time. It's early in the morning here. Click Create. And you can see I did something kind of stupid, which is I had a disk already with that name. So let me get rid of that and fix that problem. And you might say, that was fast. That was less than a minute. And I would say, yes, you're right. And this is one of the reasons why GCE is such a compelling offering. it is super fast to spin up. It's astoundingly fast. So this is, one of the reasons to look at the Google offering if you have the kind of workloads where you need to spin up machines very, very quickly. So now we've got our machine. We could reboot, delete, clone, connect to it, whatever. And I'll show you a couple other things that are objects that are inside of Compute Engine. So you've got disks. You can see the disks, and there's where I had got my error because I already had that disk. Because I said create a new disk, I already had one. So that was kind of dumb, but it's good for you to see that. And then here you can create snapshots. So if you want to add a snapshot of the machine, you just create a snapshot from that source disk, and then you'd be there. So you can say, and be good to go. Images. Here's their images, and then as I said in the docs, you can now create your own images and store them and use them. Here's networks. So if you needed to create a new network, you just go here and create your new network. Metadata about the particular thing. Let's see, cancel out of here. Operations. So this is showing, basically a log. Quotas. And you can see here's the quotas for the way I've set up billing. So GCE architecture, because I went through it pretty fast, is that you have your VM, the red squares here, your VMs, and they're contained in a project, and they of course connect to your private network or the internet, and they use different kinds of storage, persistent disk, local, or cloud storage, or they can connect to other types of storage like BigQuery. And then you have an API to interface with them. You can have the command line interface, the UI, which we just did, or code, which we will do subsequently. So the elegance of Google's offering is that it's fast, highly performant, and really easy to use. So we went through the interface and actually inadvertently made an error. So you can see things are validated when I made the name of the disk not unique. And you can, it's pretty self-explanatory going through it, how it works. Very similar to the competition, and pretty easy to use. Again, just to give you kind of a concept of what's available with GCE, images, you can use Google's, Linux, or create your own. Snapshots, you can create them for persistent disks. Again, they're getting kind of away from the non-persistent disks now. Linux kernel can be used by any instance or image within the same project. Networking, I showed you that. Firewalls, of course, you're going to add rules to permit connections, and you can add route tables. So a pretty amazingly complete offering for just coming out of beta and going into general availability a couple months ago. And how do you work with the Google Compute Engine? When you first start, you'll probably use the web console like I showed you. This is just like when you work with Amazon. When you first start, you use the Amazon console, but you pretty quickly get to scripting and tools. And then in the next screencast, I'm going to show you the new utility called gcloud. It's brand new, and gcutil, which I previewed here. And then you have client APIs, Java, Python, and more, and I'll be showing you in subsequent screencasts how to programmatically interact with the service. And then the other thing that a lot of people do, including myself in production situations, is we go multi-cloud with VMs. And so I tend to prefer to use some of these third-party vendor templating solutions. The one that I use most often is RightScale, but I've been looking at some of the other new ones, SaltStack and Scalar, and I'm going to show you those just in a minute here. In fact, now's the time. So I did some exploration around Scalar just for the screencast, and my conclusions are sort of like, if you had a good amount of time, it looks like a good solution, but because I was going quickly, it's probably a user error. I wasn't able to get all the way through their 5 steps, but I'll show you how far I got and where I got stuck. It's probably just my problem, configuration error. Looks like a good solution, but again, kind of, I'm used to using RightScale, so I'm going to also show you RightScale because that's the one that I use. So I'm going to show you both of them here. So as I said, in terms of a third-party template for GCE, again, they have a doc here, which I referenced in the slides. So to be clear, you'd use this type of solution to spin up a farm with one or more instances, could be many, could be tens or hundreds, of different servers, and then you would manage them through their console. So if I say test farm, and I have to specify my time zone, and then I say add new role, I've already pre-configured the Google Cloud. So I could create a role or I could build from server. Now if I wanted to build from server, I can never get this to connect right, but I'll show you how far I did get. And I've put in my credentials. So here I can say ABC, and here's this, and then of course I have a couple servers running that I just, and then yeah, test 1A. And then what this is supposed to be doing is taking this server and putting it into their environment. So you can see they have a scalarizer, and then it creates an image that allows management by their infrastructure. I really recommend that you read their documentation here if you want to do this, because the credentialing is a little bit tricky. Over to RightScale. And in RightScale here, again, I've set up a connection, and I'm going to manage. I'm going to view my dashboard. And I'm going to manage. I'm going to view my dashboard. And here I have this one instance that I was playing around with that they had. I had some older instances here, and notice because I'm connected to the Google Cloud, I'm also connected to Amazon because I was playing around with that. Here's Google. You can see that this test 1A here is the same instance. So if I wanted to go in here and work with this, I could say terminate. And now if I switch back over to my console and refresh, you can see it's deleting it. Okay, and then I switch back over here. There it's gone. All right, getting started with Google App Engine. Now, most commonly you wouldn't use the console for Google App Engine because you'd be deploying an application you wrote. And so what you would be doing is you'd be working with your IDE. So for me it would be Eclipse, and I would actually push it out through Eclipse, deploy from the tools there. But just to show you what it looks like, I'll take you through the console just for completeness here. And it's the same sort of process that we just went through. I think you'll find you'll be using the console more with App Engine after you've deployed an initial project. So what I would recommend that you do is that you deploy the sample project if you're getting started, just so you have some project up there you can take a look at it. Now the reason it says preview is not that the App Engine service is preview, it's that the console for App Engine is preview. There's an old separate console, and you'll see it kind of going back and forth, but I think by the time that this you get up and going, it'll probably be one console. So that's why it says preview there. All right, so when I was digging into this, boy, it's a little bit tricky because I don't have the consoles quite integrated yet. So if I look at this hello from Lynn, I've got 0 charges, and I've got a preview here. And I do see that I have some information. There, when I go to my versions, I'm back at the old independent console, which this is a little tricky. Hopefully they'll get this resolved, because here's the actual app. So this is it's just the sample app, basically. A reason to select App Engine for your solution is because it's partially managed, and it provides you a whole bunch of APIs that you commonly need in an application, everything from data stores to task queues to memcache, and it is managed for you, so it auto scales. So you can see that you've got the sections are the main, the data, and this is the different types of data associated, the data store, the high replication data store, the blobs, memcache, administration, and the billing. And how that looks on the new portal here: dashboard, logs, instances, versions, cron jobs, task queues, quota details, and settings. So at this point you use both these consoles to work with App Engine, which might seem a little bit arduous, but like I said, other than just kind of taking a quick look, you honestly don't use the console that much for App Engine. Not like I don't anyway, not like I use it for Compute Engine, because I'll deploy from my development environment basically. So to start to think about some solution architectures as we think about these different services and we understand them, I basically took some samples out of Google's documentation, and this is no different than other clouds, but just kind of applies it to Google's cloud. So here's a real simple architecture where you've got some games that are being served up. So you have a front end that is hosted on App Engine, and Then you have backends that are hosted services, basically, that are hosted on Compute Engine. And then you have, your database server that's on Compute Engine, which could be relational or non-relational. Now, just for flexibility, I'll also point out that on App Engine, if you want partially managed services, they're called backends, I think. I have to look it up. But in any case, it's like a Windows Azure worker role rather than a web role. That Google does have that as well. So if you wanted to have partially managed service versus Google Compute Engine, which is infrastructure as a service, you have basically the same options. So this just gives you an idea of a simple sample architecture, and there's many others that you can look at. So again, I am all about data. So just as we're looking at these services, I'll just remind you that for App Engine, you have basically 5 choices for data, and it's super, super important. And as an architect, I'm spending lots of time with customers trying to figure out which data store to use for which part of their data. Now, sometimes you just want relational, so that's Cloud SQL, MySQL. You also have the data store, which is high replication, no SQL solution, and then you have cloud storage, which is like an S3 kind of thing, and then you have BigQuery and Memcache. Now, because BigQuery is very unique to Google, what I thought I would do is show just a tiny bit of BigQuery here as well. And before I do that, how do you work with App Engine? So, like any other service, you start with the web console. It does generate REST requests, just like I showed you with GCE. There are Python commands as well that I'm going to be going over in screencast 4. That's GC Cloud, GC Util, App Config, and others. Client APIs, which I'll be going over in screencast 5 for Java. And you obviously work with that principally, at least I do with App Engine. And there are third-party integration points. They're more around development. I'm going to actually show you something that I've been playing around with that I really like called CodeMB, which is a in-browser editor that has really good integration with App Engine and some other PaaS solutions. So I'll be showing you that too. So another new capability that Google is working on that it's interesting, particularly for Google App Engine, is this thing called a cloud endpoint. Now, I referenced in the slide here a couple of Google Developer Live screencasts. There's like 2 hours worth of screencasts that are pretty good, along with the sample. So if this seems interesting to you, I recommend that you explore off at this point. But basically, the concept is you have a set of libraries that allow you to take Google App Engine services and to expose them as cloud endpoints via a pretty easy programming paradigm, via attribute declarations or method annotations. So this actually reminds me, I'm coming out of the Microsoft world, of kind of a WCF. And again, this might not be interesting comparison for some of you guys listening, but if you're a Microsoft person, kind of reminds me. Their API is integrated with the tooling. They have a thing called an API Explorer. So if you make your Google App Engine service a cloud endpoint, and you want to make your service available for consumption by Android or iOS developers, they can then explore your API through the browser-based tooling, which is cool. And they have a lot of support for infrastructure that you need, like OAuth if you want it, and client key management. So it's kind of a big topic, but I just thought it was another interesting thing to include here, talking about Google App Engine, because it's just another capability in terms of using it as a solution, building your service there, and then exposing it with these cloud endpoints for other consumers. All right, I promised I'd talk about BigQuery, so here it is. I just love BigQuery, being the database person that I am. So the idea here is that you have query as a service, and it is a cloud-based service that allows you to do exploratory queries that are SQL-like on massive amounts of data for your particular need. Now, there's a web console for testing, just like the other consoles that we've looked at, but of course there will be APIs, which is really what you're going to use, because you most normally use this as a service in your application. I do mention here that you want to use the limit keyword when testing, because you're paying for the queries here, and when you're testing out big queries, you could be paying big dollars. This is like many other times when I've tried out other types of big solutions, big data solutions like Hadoop and I end up having to call the vendor and say, hey, I tried out something too big, so don't say I didn't tell you. So this is, like the other big data solutions, what might you use for this? Log analysis, sensor output, mobile game instrumentation, particular use case where you're capturing behavioral data and optimizing. So it's just, it's one of those things that's pretty unique to Google, and I want to make sure to include it in this series because it's important that you understand it's there. So BigQuery is an API that you enable for your project, and then you have billing based on your querying. And you have a console that you can work with, and basically you bring your data into Google's cloud, which is a consideration, of course, and then you have this SQL-like language that you run against it, which is part of the elegance of this product, because as we all know, many big data solutions require us database people to learn new programming paradigms, which is much easier said than done. So if we can use something that's like T-SQL, it's a lot, we can be a lot more productive a lot more quickly sometimes. And then you basically see the results, and that's all there's to it. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what this looks like, and we can talk about it a bit more in the demo. So I'm going to go into the project where I have BigQuery enabled, and that's going to take me over to the BigQuery Cloud Console. And you can see that I have query history, I have job history, which is around bringing the data up, and then I have some various data sets. Now I've loaded various data sets here, but there are also data sets that you can work with. So they're public data sets. You can see if I click on here, create new table, share, delete, whatever. So I open it up, and we have things like the GitHub information, Shakespeare information, Wikipedia information. So now I'm inside of my query history, and you can see very SQL-like select station number from the public data samples, the GSOD data where the year is 2010. There it shows my previous query run. I can edit the query if I want to. And I also have a bunch of options here that do really matter in terms of how fast the query runs, interactive or batch, and how much you pay for it too. And then whether or not the results are ephemeral or stored to a table. So you want to read all this if you're going to actually use this in production. I assume most of you are just going to try it out. So, and really all it is then you just click the button. Notice you have an abandon, and you can see the query ran in 28 seconds and almost 2 gigs processed. So because I am working as a cloud and data architect, I always love my architecture diagram. So this is one that I found from Google's documentation that was more reflective of the kind of architectures that I've been creating in production on basically, frankly, Amazon and Azure's clouds more frequently than Google's cloud. But again, great service offerings here, so this is something that we all want to be aware of. So going through the diagram, you can see that we've got the mobile clients in the front, and then we've got cloud endpoints, and then we have a mobile backend in the middle here running on App Engine. And then we use some other services. We have Google Cloud Messaging and Memcache in the middle there, and then we're using the App Engine data store associated with our Google App Engine instance. We're also taking use of some of other APIs that are unique to Google. So you see in the middle there, we're using the Google Maps API. And then going over towards the right, when we're also moving towards Compute Engine, we are making use of task queues, scheduled tasks, the Search API, and the Logs API for custom logging on App Engine. We also are using image services. And then when we go over to Compute Engine, we're using cloud storage, probably for blobs. And then we're doing our batches on Compute Engine, and we're running BigQuery against that data that's being associated with Compute Engine. So it's a big data sort of processing solution. And you can see up at the top, it talks about the load balancing, which is going across all GAE instances, because the diagram is showing multiple instances. Of course, we've got auto scaling because we're on the Google Cloud, a huge feature of Google Cloud. Static content serving, denial of service protection, and monitoring and management. So it's a very, very complete offering, and also has some services such as BigQuery that are unique to Google, all running on the Google infrastructure. So that gives us an idea of the consoles, and in the next screencast I'm going to talk about billing, because hopefully by this point you're saying, this seems interesting. I wonder how much this stuff costs. So I'm going to do an entire screencast talking about billing. It won't be too long, but just so that we can get an understanding of costing and how to figure out costs. And then subsequent screencasts, I'll talk about the command line for scripting, and then programming, and then learning more. Again, I'm going to make my call to help the next generation, and one way to do that is by making use of the free and open source courseware that I've created with a bunch of collaborators at teachingkidsprogramming.org. So to keep learning, RSS my blog or subscribe to my YouTube channel. I've got hundreds of videos on big data topics there, all for free. And if you are a Pluralsight subscriber, I did do this series last year, and I have actually a class on BigQuery that's still pretty relevant. So Pluralsight is a paid subscription, so if you happen to have a subscription, go for it. If not, do a trial and maybe take a look at it, and it's a well worthwhile subscription. So anyway, I'm Lynn Langit. Happy New Year. Have a great day.